move things?
Everything is perfect.
Good.
Welcome to another episode of the Donut Shop Chronicles. This morning I got a very special guest, author Dennis Griffin. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much, Fred. A pleasure to be with you, and thanks for inviting me.
Oh, this is definitely our pleasure, because I definitely have read a couple books of yours, and I got a lot of questions for you.
Sure.
Let me start out with this one right here. When you to author someone's book, do you fact check anything, or do you just write exactly what they tell you?
Now, my policy is, if it can't be proved, it won't be used. So what I do is there are certain things you can't really fact check. For example, if you are going to write about a conversation between your co-author and an individual who you can't reach or is deceased or something, you have to take the word of the co-author that conversation took place. But anything that can be fact checked in the way of court documents, newspaper articles, TV stories, those types of things are fact checked. And I put the onus to a great degree on my co-author to find the documentation for me and submit it. Plus, I do my own fact checking.
So if you don't believe it and can't find it, you don't print it.
Exactly. Here's an example. This is something happened to me a couple of years ago. I was contacted by an individual, a former gangster, and he wanted me to write his book. And we talked, and it sounded like he had a very good story. I thought it had potential. And I went through my spiel about, everything's got to be right. As much as is humanly possible, this book has to be accurate. And if I find out that you didn't tell me the truth about something, that you made things up, I'm pulling the plug, and that'll be the end of it. So I was one section, he was taking credit for a bank robbery that was still unsolved, and he claimed to have done it. Well, in my research, I found out that he was in prison at the time of the bank robbery. That obviously he couldn't be in two places at once. So I called him on it, and I said, I know you might, like a lot of people, want a little resume enhancement. I said, but not in my books. We're not doing it. So that was the end of our relationship.
I am in the process of reading one of your books right now.
Yes.
And
yes.
Actually, I'm getting on a very friendly basis with David. And this is a real twister, this story right here.
It is. It was fun to write. And one thing, I'm, of course, interested in mob history. I like that. And so from that standpoint, I learned things that I never knew before. And that actually surprised me. I had written so many books about that era in Las Vegas, the so-called Spilatro era. I thought I knew pretty much everything there was to know about that time period. And when Frank Collada called me, it was in August of 2019, and he said, guess who was on my tour with me last night? At that time, Frank was doing private tours, taking people around Vegas to where incidents that were portrayed in the movie Casino actually took place. And then he would describe what happened and so forth. And I said, who's that? And he said, David Bowman. And I said, you got me. Who's David Bowman? And he said, well, he was the guy, the informant that worked with the G and Metro, and ended up getting me a conviction, my third predicate felony conviction. And I said, he went on your tour? And Frank said, yeah. He said, it started out a little tense. He said, but things improved. He said, and we ended up having a cordial visit. And he said, the bottom line is that David wants to tell his story about his involvement with the prosecutors and building the case against me. And I said, and you think I should write it? And he said, yeah. He said, hey, he said, we each did what we had to do at the time. He said, I don't carry a grudge. So with Frank's blessing, I ended up, reaching out to David, and we ended up doing the book.
I'm very glad we just touched on that right now, because that's validation right there for David, that Frank actually admitted that David was the man who set him up and all that. Because David's having a little hard time, because there's really nothing to find about him in this whole story. Like you said, you didn't even hear of it. But at least Frank has vouched and said that is the man that did that to me. That is great.
Oh, absolutely. I certainly, even if I had stumbled onto David by accident without Frank introducing me, um, I wouldn't have gone forward with the book with David without Frank validating that this stuff happened.
Yes, I was actually speaking with David last night for a couple hours, and I was telling him, I said, it's crazy how all you did in that story, and you possibly at the end were in jail, and Frank was already out.
Yeah, like I think you said in your opening there was some twists in the story.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff in this. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Can you tell me anything you know about the Detroit family?
I know very little. I got into when I my book, The Battle for Las Vegas: The Law versus the Mob. I talked about the skim operations, the casino skimming in Vegas, and the Detroit was involved in that. So I got a little bit in that book into the Detroit operation, but very little. My main concentration was Chicago, and to a lesser degree, Kansas City.
Yes, definitely, because I had just spoke with Gary too about the Wire, the Kansas City Wire.
Gary Jenkins.
Yes,
He's a great guy, Gary. God bless him.
yes, I'm dancing all around this subject right here. I'm actually a big fan of the Spilatro. That yes, I'm into that. I think it doesn't get, you know what I mean, enough shine on it. It's like Detroit. Nobody knows much about Detroit, which I say is actually good, because evidently they kept a lot of secrets. And they kept them good because they were a family and they were a major player, but nobody seems to know much about it. But evidently they've kept their business wrapped up pretty good.
Yes, you're quite right. I've heard very little about Detroit. I know they got a family and all that, but like you say, as far as being public information or being out there, it isn't to any great degree.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed too is once a gangster is busted, years down the line, he's usually best friends or good friends with the agent that took him down.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And when I first got into this, the mob stuff, and started writing about it, I always thought that these people were mortal enemies, would be enemies for life. I mean, they were on opposite sides of the law. They had their own agendas. Each one was trying to outsmart the other one, or so on. And when I uh, first, when I started working with Frank Collada back in 2005, actually, I was, I thought he would be, very anti the police, but um, when I mentioned certain detectives to him and certain agents, they were like buddies. He talked well of them and so on. And I was doing for a while a local TV show in Las Vegas, and I invited Frank. Happened to be in town at the time from Southern California when I had a weekly show, and I invited him and two FBI agents and a Las Vegas Metro intelligence commander, Commander Kent Clifford, all to be in the studio together for the show. And it was, I was wondering when I did that, I said, boy, I hope we don't have a fist fight in here. I said, these guys lay eyes on each other and all of a sudden the Dukes come up and they go at it. And I was really surprised. It was like a bunch of old buddies. I mean, everything was cordial. They busted each other's chops a little bit. It was all good natured. The cops would tell how they had Frank under surveillance, and he'd say, "Yeah, I knew it all the time." He says, "I knew when you guys got up in the morning, when you went to bed at night." And then they'd laugh, and then they'd get into the next thing. So it was really surprising that that's the way these guys got along.
Yeah, they definitely, a lot of people turn out to be friends with the agents that take them down. And I was wondering, what do you know on the Rosenthal possibly being an informant story?
I have heard that multiple sources. I can't prove it. Okay, so this is simply an opinion and speculation on my part. I tend to believe that's very possible.
All right, because I was talking with David last night, and I said, well, if Rosenthal was an informant, Frank becomes one. You are informing right now. Now, what would the odds be that if Tony doesn't get whacked, he becomes an informant?
I think the odds were pretty good. Tony had a lot of issues. He had health issues. He was having heart problems and so forth. Um, it, all these cases, Oscar Goodman, who was his attorney, excuse me, had done well for Tony. Tony didn't serve any time to speak of. He was held for a while on this charge or that charge, but as far as doing any major time, he didn't. Oscar kept him out of jail. But a lot of these cases, he got continuances. In other words, they were never really disposed of. They were always out there. And at some point, they were going to have to be settled. There was going to have to be an accounting. And I think there was a lot of pressure on Tony, or the government could have put a lot of pressure on him to tell him, hey, this is your only out. You better roll and help us out. And I think I'm not saying Tony did that. I'm just saying I think he was a candidate for that kind of pressure to be put on him. And apparently the bosses in Chicago felt that he was a risk. I think that was part of the reason that they bumped him off.
Well, because you see, when I was talking with David, you see how quick people can change from being, a madman, a killer, just the most ruthless man around. And it's so easy to take somebody's life. And literally, you would take somebody's life on the orders because they had became an informant. And then once it was your time to get in trouble, it was so easy for you to flip that switch and turn over to that side. That sometimes that amazes me is how quick they were to kill, and also how quick they were to roll over for the government.
Yeah, I think if you go back in the days of Al Capone and before the 30s and 20s and so on, some of these organized crime bosses, they called them the Mustache Pete's and so forth, and I think they had a whole different code back then. I think there was and I think as we've moved forward in time, the days and the thinking, the thought process of that went on with mobsters back 50, 70, 80 years ago has changed. And the people I talk with tell me one of the big causes for that is the so-called RICO. When the feds got the RICO statute in, the Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organization, where they could charge the gangsters for street crimes and running these so-called corrupt organizations, and that really gave them a powerful tool to use against the criminals, against the organized criminals. And everybody that I talk with tells me that was the RICO was a key turning point in what we have today, with more people flipping and turning informants or turning government witness.
Yeah, I basically think that 90% of the group becomes an informant at the end. I believe some of the ceremonies they do in the beginning that to induct you in, they don't even need to do anymore because they almost can look at each other and tell who's gonna switch at the end and who's not gonna. Because I honestly think it's because the government offers too many deals. There should be no deals, literally, especially not to the guy in the group who's done the 13 murders. He gets the best deal out of the whole group. The guy who actually ordered it, or another low-level person in the group, does like 23 years. The guy with the 13 murders is out in 8. It's just the way they got that all backwards. So really, the serious killers all get back on the street.
Oh, look at Sammy Gravano. Look at the way the eyebrows got raised when Sammy got a deal. What did he have? 19 murders he admitted to. I think it was 19 or so murders he admitted to, and he got a hell of a deal. But they just wanted Gotti more than they wanted him. It was, but a lot of people had trouble believing that a guy with Sammy's history could end up with the deal he got.
Yeah, definitely nothing become of it. I think that's just another one of those things right there where you would on the orders of somebody take out an informant, but somebody tells you that they're an informant. It's just proof that the treachery. So I mean, let alone what you have to worry about from the police and all that, what you have to worry about from your buddy is just as bad.
Well, it's kind of ironic. On Wednesday, well, let me backtrack a bit. A few weeks ago, I was contacted by a New York guy, former mobster, and we talked for quite some time, and I agreed to write his book with him. And we had our first telephone session, almost a 3-hour session on Wednesday that I recorded, and it's getting in. His story is getting into what we're just talking about now, about informants. Who's really your friend in that life? Who can you trust? Who's going to be there? A lot of times, the guy that takes you for that final walk is a guy you think is a friend. He's the guy that can get close to you. He's the guy that you trust. You let him get near you, and you go out for a little stroll, and only one of you comes back. I mean, so it's really, like I say, a little bit ironic that we're having this conversation today, and I just had that 3-hour conversation again on Wednesday that gets into this whole thing. So it's not just New York mob, it's not just Chicago mob, it's not just Kansas City. It's in the system, if you will, that these things happen. That there's a lot of guys that are willing to turn, and if push comes to shove, when somebody's got to be taken out, one day the hitter becomes the hittee, and you never know.
It's safe to say that the days of loyalty in anything organized illegal are over. It's the first to the police station gets the best deal.
Yeah, the prosecutors know that. I mean, obviously they're very skilled at it. They know what they're doing. They know how to put the pressure on. They know how to make deals. They know how far they can go, and they know what each guy that they're after can give them if they can flip them, if they can convince them to cooperate. And in fact, when Frank Lotta was telling me that when he made his deal, he had to do a little time, and they put him in what they call the rat unit in the prison. These were all informants or government witnesses. And Frank always had a distinction, and he pointed this out to me. And everybody can have their own opinion of how valid it is, but where Frank came from was that an informant is someone who basically maybe gets in a pinch, gets busted for this or that, and tells the cops, "Hey, look, I can give you this, I can give you that, drop the charges, make them go away, or whatever, and I'll take care of you. I'll give you stuff. I'll give you information." Or they want money. They just come to the cops and say, "Hey, I know a lot of people, and for $50 here, $100 there, I can pass things on to you." Now Frank then when they make this offer, the cops will say, "Well, we need you to wear a wire. We need this recorded," and they'll do that. Frank puts them in the category. He put them in the category as informants. Then he has the other guys where he put himself, which happened. Apparently, my modem got screwed up or something.
Oh yeah, it was definitely something happened. I was sitting there like, what? And then I was waiting. I was like, oh, it's gonna click back on in a second. It'll click back on, and then then as soon as we figured it was anything, as soon as I stepped away, boom, you came back on. Well, how Frank thinks about that, I have a theory on that. There's a rat and there's an informant. An informant to me is like David. He wasn't already pinched. He just started telling on his own free will. His back wasn't against the wall. He could have just walked away from the whole situation. To me, a rat is someone who is involved in everything, and then soon as the pinch comes down, decides he doesn't want to be a part of it and then steps away.
Yeah, I agree. Like I say, you can call them, what you will, rat, informant, but there are two different types of people that end up giving information to the government.
Yes, definitely. I notice you have another project going right now with Anthony Hootie Russo.
That's the fellow I was just talking about that I had the 3-hour conversation with on Wednesday. Yes.
Yes, Hootie is actually my very first interview on the podcast.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's quite a guy.
Yes. Oh, he's very energetic.
That's a good description. Yes.
Yeah, very good fellow though. Very good.
And I just want to tell you mentioned Goodfellow, and that reminded me of Henry Hill. I just wanted to tell you one of my experiences with Henry was a little eye-opening to me. Henry and I were talking, and he was telling me how they'd done a couple of truck hijackings. That the crew he was in did a lot of truck hijackings, and he said they all frequently went to Las Vegas to launder the money. If they did come back with money, they could claim they won it in Vegas. It'd be tough, way to trace it, and so on and so forth. And he said the one time the crew went and they were pretty well heeled, financially. And he said the first 2 or 3 days, he said, we were kicking butt. He said we were doing very well at the tables. He said then everything changed. He said, and by the time about 3 or 4 days went by, he said they all came back flat broke. And I said, well, how much money are we talking, Henry? He said, probably a couple $100,000. So I'm thinking when I hear that, if it was me, if I had lost $200,000, I would have probably been up on the top of that casino ready to dive off. I don't know if I could have taken it. So I asked Henry, I said, didn't that bother you? And he said, not really. He said, you got to understand something to us. He said, back down to us, money was like monopoly money. It wasn't real. It was so easy to come by. It wasn't like real money. He said, all we did, we went back to New York and we hijacked another truck and we were okay. So, I mean, that was his explanation for his thinking, the thought process of that these guys could go out and lose a couple $100,000 in Vegas and not jump off a roof. To them, it wasn't money. It was just, hey, there's a lot of it out there, and all we got to do is go back and a couple of scores, and we're right back flush again. So that was the mindset, and it was tough for me to get my head around that because I never had the luxury of being able to write off, that kind of money without it bothering me.
Now, when you spoke with Henry, anywhere in there was it about you doing a book for him?
No. We were strictly involved in promotional type stuff. Henry's, at the time, was his girlfriend, contacted me, and they were going to do an event in Vegas, and I was living in Vegas at the time. And Henry, of course, was going to talk about the New York operation. And I had just written my first couple of books about Las Vegas and about Spilatro and Frank Colada. And they wanted to know if I would come with them, be at the same place, and discuss the Chicago outfit. So agreed to do that. And that's how I ended up meeting Henry. And as I recall, our first event together was at a pizza shop that had contacted Henry and asked him if he'd come and help give them a big day. So, and Henry, love him or hate him, I know certainly there are people that are on both sides of the fence when it comes to Henry, but he could draw a crowd. I'll tell you, I did a lot of events with him afterward, and some of them at the Las Vegas Clark County Library a few years ago. Every February was Mob Month, and each Tuesday night they did something about organized crime, and I would usually put on one or two of the presentations. I would be the moderator for a panel discussion and so on. And when I could book Henry as one of the panelists, I knew that place was going to be jammed. And I believe the theater we were in held 350 people. They had an overflow room of another 100, 150 with a closed circuit TV set up. And when Henry was there, you couldn't get a seat in either place. So Henry was like a magnet, boy. He could pack the house.
Definitely. Well, Scorsese can make you definitely. He can make you shine. Definitely. He can put a good spin on your character. Definitely. I would say that. Definitely.
Yes, absolutely.
I always thought about trying to get a painting from Henry before he passed away. Now the price has gone like through the roof on him, and to me, it's not as special. I would have liked to get one from him, definitely one of his paintings. My only problem with Henry is I feel like he sugar-coated some of them stories, definitely. Only because I'm like, you're an associate at the best, so all the perks you speak of and all that, I don't see, you know what I mean? I don't see you front table at any, you know what I mean, Copacabana, none of that, definitely. I see a little embellishment in the stories, but I know he definitely was there, you know what I mean? And Paul was definitely sleeping with his old lady, you know what I mean? But some of the stories, I'm like, wow, you embellished them a little bit.
Yeah, another quick Henry Hill story. When I met Henry, now of course Henry was known to have been in drugs, and I don't know if he was using drugs when I met him, but he certainly had the alcohol issue. And scheduling Henry for an event was like kind of like a time bomb, navigating a minefield. You never knew for sure Henry would show up, and if so, what kind of shape he'd be in when he got there. So I remember one night at the Clark County Library, we were due to go on at 7, and it was about 10 minutes to 7, and everybody else was there. I had some, I believe, an IRS agent and a FBI agent, and I had a couple of other mobsters, and Henry was the only one missing. So I'm sweating it out, and I knew because the place was packed, and I knew if Henry wasn't there, we'd probably have a riot on our hands. People would not be happy. So Henry got in about maybe 5 minutes of, and I was obviously relieved. One look at him, and I could tell he'd probably had a rough afternoon. And I don't know as he was. Well, I think Henry probably always could have blown about a 2. I mean, I think that was his functionality level. But so everybody had a microphone in front of them at their place at the tables, and I'm looking at Henry out of the corner of my eye, and I see he wants to go to sleep, and his head keeps going down toward the microphone. Then he'll catch himself, and he straightens up. And I would call on him when I could, but I had other guests there. I couldn't just concentrate on Henry. So I'm talking to one of the other people, and I'm looking sideways there, and I see Henry's head go down. This time he can't catch himself. And boom, his forehead hit the microphone, and it sounded just like a gunshot going off. And the people in the audience think somebody's there to hit somebody. they think it was a gunshot, and people are screaming and diving under their seats and all that stuff. And of course, Henry wakes up when when his head hit the microphone, and some poor lady was trying to get to the exit, and Henry sees her heading for the door, and he says, "You, where are you going?" And she stops, and she's scared. She can't talk. She's stuttering. She said, I'm trying to go to the ladies' room. Henry says, "You ain't going nowhere. You heard too much." I felt sorry for the woman. And then everybody in the place broke out laughing, and she finally got it that it was a joke. And things returned to normal. People came back from their seats. So Henry, he caused the issue when he fell asleep briefly there, but he resurrected it with a little humor, and everything turned out okay. So the audience was happy, and we got back to the presentation.
Well, that actually is an amazing story. That